Oh, welcome to Music Monday, everybody. My name is Benjamin and I hate to do this list. Talking about good songs and great artists is why I have this channel. I want to share some of my passion for music, but obviously sometimes you are enthusiastic about an artist and have high expectations, and then the artist doesn't deliver, and that's when you have to do a top 10 most disappointing albums of 2021 list. So keep in mind that this is not a worst albums list, because I don't really like the concept of shit talking on music, but this is a most disappointing albums list. Most of the albums on here are decent, mediocre at best. Some are really bad, but we're gonna talk about that later, but most are just not as good as they could have been. And with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into the list. Kicking off our list are Evanescence with The Bitter Truth, and this album is just very underwhelming. Amy Lee is a great songwriter and a great singer. She has shown both respectively in the past, but this album feels very out of place in their discography. There are good moments on here, there's no denying that. With Use My Voice you even have a great moment, but so much of this album feels worn out, like you've heard it before, reused, recycled, like you've heard it before by this very band, but done so much better in the past. Fans waited for 10 years just to have an album where the motto seemed to be like, it doesn't matter what we do, because Amy Lee's voice is just gonna magically make everything perfect. And while she is great, it's simply not enough to satisfy 10 years full of expectations. Coldplay's Music of the Spheres had a lot of potential. There were great features involved, great producers behind the scenes, and obviously Coldplay themselves, who have shown time and time again that they can write good, catchy songs. But Music of the Spheres is none of that. This is their 9th studio album, but somehow they still sound like they're trying to find themselves. Coldplay used to be a band that would define what's on top of the charts, that would define what's to come in the music industry, and on this album they sound like they're chasing someone else's trend. The weird emoji song titles might have worked if they weren't given predominantly to completely useless interludes that kill the pacing of this album. I will give them that there is a sliver of hope at the end. The closer, Coloratura, is a 10-minute, Pink Floyd-y, beautifully crafted masterpiece, and it's almost worth sitting through the rest of this album just to listen to that song, but unfortunately, almost. Weezer always do something weird, and in 2021 they somehow managed to both end up on my best albums of the year list and on my most disappointing albums of the year list. Weezer released 2 albums this year, OK Human, which was a unannounced surprise album that was inspired by quarantine, and it's honestly really good. And then there's Van Weezer, which they announced and celebrated for over a year as the great return for actual hard rock music of like the older era, and Weezer would bring all that back, and Van Weezer would be their best album ever, and this is what they came up with? I honestly wouldn't care about this album being so mediocre, because I've heard so many mediocre Weezer albums in my life, but I can't wrap my head around the fact that they write OK Human and put that out, then go back, look at Van Weezer and go like, yep, this is a good album that we should definitely put out. If they had spent a year promoting OK Human and then just dropped Van Weezer as a little side thing, I would have no issues with that, because there are some good songs on here, but oh my god, how can you raise everybody's expectations to a maximum and then deliver this? True to Weezer mediocrity, there are some good songs on here, especially in the first half, but as soon as you get in the second half, you get buried by songs that you cannot care for and that you will forget as soon as you stop playing the album. God, it hurts me so much to put Mod Sun on this list, because if you've ever watched an interview with the guy, you know he's such a genuinely nice and thoughtful person, and I really wish I didn't have to do this, but he wasted so much potential on his 2021 album Internet Killed the Rockstar. If you listen to this album, you get the impression that he and his team wanted to jump on the wave of pop punk in 2021 and were just like, well, we only have 3 good songs, what do we do? And then somebody suggested, well, let's just put them at the start of the album and then hope that no one listens to the rest. But guess what? I did, and so did a lot of other people who expected something more to come after Bones, Karma and Flames, because those 3 songs are absolutely insane. You have Bones, an emotional song, you have Karma, a pop punk energy riff, then you have Flames combining the both, featuring Avril Lavigne, a great song that almost made it onto my top 50 songs of the year list, and then you miss that emotionality and that energy in the entire rest of the album. Everything that comes after the first couple of songs feels underwhelming and incomplete, and I genuinely believe if he takes a little more time for the next project, that the next album, if it sounds more like the first couple of songs and other singles he's been putting out, that this could be on a top list, but this album, unfortunately, is just not it. I had only heard one song previously before listening to Versatile, and unfortunately for me it was Breathe Again, the absolute best song of the album, and thus I had pretty high expectations. And then I listened to the album and I was really confused. I went back and listened to their earlier work, 2018 self-titled album, which was really good, and I have no idea what happened in between. Well, that's not exactly true. Versatile is what happens when you chase the Imagine Dragons sound just a little too much and you end up with songs that sound not like your band anymore. You sound uninspired and bland, especially on the lyrical side of things, with songs like Human Nature or Same Blood that are so uninspired and generic I can't. And then you have the same thing for the instrumentation on a lot of these songs. Work literally sounds like you fed an AI bot every single Imagine Dragons hit and just said, well, do something with it, and that's what you end up with. I do not understand why so many bands keep thinking that being a verse version of Imagine Dragons is better than being a good version of themselves, because there is potential on this album. There is a different direction that they could have gone in, but they decided not to. Let the Chaos Reign and Breathe Again are the only 2 songs that I'm gonna revisit from this album, and they are the only decent ones. If they make an album that goes into that direction, I'm sure that fans will love it and critics as well, because those 2 songs are also by far the most streamed ones from the album. I mean, really, what do you expect when you get the sent Anger producer for your album? But it's The Offspring and they've made some great albums in the past. I do not understand why this album exists. It's not necessary, they don't sound like they want to do it, and they could have just remained a touring band and left their legacy kind of untouched. Obviously there's things going on behind the scenes with lineup changes and other issues, but this album is not what anyone expected. If you keep all the issues that they've had in the past 9 years in mind, you would have expected an album that sounds like they are channeling their anger, an album that sounds like they care, an album that sounds like The Offspring. What we got is dad jokes, but worse because they are spread out over 33 minutes with the most generic guitar sounds you can imagine and the occasional ooh. Oh, when I said that most of the albums on this list were okay at least, I did not mean this one. Asking Alexandria continue their journey of trying to find a way in which they can change their sound without sounding generic, and they fail. Crisis for the band began in 2017 with their self-titled album that had some memorable moments but was mostly forgettable, a 5 out of 10 on a good day. But last year in 2020 they actually released a good album. I would rate it a 7.5 out of 10 with some memorable moments, and the not so memorable moments weren't bad and a lot of potential for the future. But with See What's on the Inside, they just completely went back to a 5 out of 10 at best. You can see a lot of the things that I praised about their last album on this album, with songs like Faded Out or See What's on the Inside, the title track, or even You've Made It This Far, which are genuinely good. But then you have the entire rest, which just sounds boring, bland, and basically forgettable. Developing new sounds and expanding your creative comfort zone are completely natural things for bands, and I have no problem with Asking Alexandria going down the same path, but generally your music should evolve and not devolve.
These really sick lights, if you wanna come over. They tried to scare me twice, but look, they both can change colors like that.
Waterparks were among my picks for best album of 2019. Fandom was a great return to form for the band. I absolutely loved it and I obviously expected more of that. And most of the singles promised more of that, but the album is just wrong. The opener to Greatest Hits is actually good, and I would love to hear the album that this is the right opener for, but unfortunately it's not the one for the album we got, because it leads absolutely nowhere and feels completely out of place. Even the good songs that I genuinely enjoy of this album have a weird mix and sound kind of off, and the second half of the album just straight up sucks. Most of the things on this album sound weirdly processed and weirdly mixed, and especially in the second half it sounds like it focuses way too much on Austin Knight, who, yes, is a great singer and a great lyricist, but there are other members in this band and I would have loved for them to be involved, but now it just sounds messy and out of place. I love Waterparks and I've been praising them for the last couple of years, which is why it hurt me so much that they came out with an album that is in most places worse than forgettable. If this album ended after the first 10 songs and was mixed a little differently, it could have been really good, but unfortunately it doesn't. Only one of us will make it out alive, and it's not you! I need to make two things very clear about Imagine Dragons coming in second as the most disappointing album of the year. One, this is easily the best album on this entire list, and two, it's easily their best album since Night Visions, and with that being said, I'm still disappointed. Dan Reynolds and company finally took some time off to write a decent album after basically releasing something every couple of months after Smoke and Mirrors in 2015, and it shows. It's a good album, it's a 7 out of 10, but it could have been a 10 out of 10. When listening to this album, there is one phrase that keeps popping into my mind, and it's Jack of all trades, master of none, and that's absolutely true for this album. You can't miss if everything's a target, and so you see Imagine Dragons going for the softer side and the heavier side, the electronic side, the overblown, overproduced side, but then also the minimalistic side, the side that says, wait, I've heard this song before, and weirdly also the reggae side of things. They somehow couple great songs like Dull Knives, the opener, or Wrecked with mediocre songs, and then songs where I genuinely wonder how they ever left the demo phase. Cutthroat is jaw-droppingly bad, it is overproduced, it is bland lyrically, and nobody seems to have told Dan Reynolds that screaming doesn't automatically equal emotionality. Giants also has screaming for the sake of screaming, because look how cool we are screaming now. But then you have Dull Knives, a great song where screaming is actually emotional. And if you only listen to Giants and Cutthroat, you might get the impression that Dan Reynolds is a terrible vocalist. But then you go back to Dull Knives and you're like, wow, this guy can actually do what he's paid to do. And then there's also No Time for Toxic People, which is fine, but it rips off a Michael Bublé melody and some of the lyrics. What? Dan Reynolds manages to put his best and worst vocal performance on the same album, which is truly impressive. I genuinely hope that they manage to focus on what they're good at for Mercury Act 2, because this album, while not bad, does not achieve its full potential. Oh, this album. Everybody who is in the vicinity of rock and metal named this their 2021 worst album, and I don't necessarily agree with it because it doesn't suck 100%, but it's definitely the most disappointing one. And Age Remember are one of the GOATs, one of the best bands in the genre. I absolutely love and adore their music. Their 2013 album Common Courtesy is among my 10 favorite albums of all time. I love the band, which is why it hit me so hard in the face when they released this as their great announced return to form after 5 years of waiting, after countless rescheduling of release dates, after reworks on the album, and after announcing it for so long. This is what they came out with? Generic lyrics for car commercials with generic instrumentation for, well, car commercials. Wait, is this their secret plan? A car to remember? Obviously, they are in their 40s now, they are less angry, they are more focused on other things, but that doesn't mean they had to give up all creative integrity. From the car commercials to the Oasis ripoff at the closer, and also the half-assed try to sound like we did before on Viva La Mexico, this album disappoints so much. Oh, and the most annoying thing about this album is that not everything sucks, so you always have that glimpse of it could have been so good, but it just isn't. You have songs like Permanent that by no means are perfect, but they are good, they're decent. And then there's Re-Entry and Mind Reader that showcase that you can become softer musically without giving up your musical identity. I also really like the idea of Brick Wall, not necessarily the song that they came up with, but the idea behind it. And there was a lot of potential there, and there's a lot more potential on Resentment, arguably the best track on the entire album, and it's a natural progression for the band. It is a chance to go into a more electronic but still heavy but new and innovative direction that I would have loved to see. But instead we got one interesting song and then just bland nothingness on most of the other tracks. I have no idea if the band wanted this sound or if Fueled by Ramen pushed for it, but it feels like they had some good ideas and then just mixed in some mediocre and honestly some bad ideas, and then even the good ideas became polished by countless re-edits and mixing and mastering processing, and it just doesn't sound like A Day to Remember anymore for the most part of the album. I know that Jeremy McKinnon can still do good things. He has worked on a new Wage War album, which is amazing, and in some moments on the album you hear his real voice and his good voice come through, but most of the time it sounds over-processed, and I wish that someone had told the band that you can go into a softer direction without completely losing your identity. Just look at Bring Me the Horizon's Ammo, a great album that also was a lot softer than anything they've done previously. Let's be real, A Day to Remember made an album to forget, and with everything going on in the band, it's also a year to forget for them. I really hope that they manage to pull themselves together, because some of the stuff that they've released previously is honestly among my favorite material of all time. But if this is what we can expect from now on, then that's not A Day to Remember anymore. That does it for this list. I'm gonna go and calm down now. Please let me know what your most disappointing album was in the comments down below so that we can talk about it, and also let me know what your favorite album of the year was so that I can take a look at it before recording my top 30 albums of the year for next week. With that out of the way, this channel is brand new, so please make sure to subscribe if you happen to like this video. See you next week. Goodbye.